From the fruited plains of Central California, welcome to Journey to the Stage with Brian Fraser. This is episode number 76, the first episode of my fourth season. And if you've been with us for a while, you may have noticed that the podcast has a brand new intro. So I thought it was time to spruce things up a bit and came up with a little guitar riff that I liked. And Greg Essington from the great indie band from Texas, Blue Water Highway, recorded it for me. And another great indie musician from Texas as well, Ben Balmer, laid the harmonica over that for me. So hope you guys like it. I think it's really cool and excited to kind of jump into this fourth season. So before we jump into our chat, be sure to follow or subscribe wherever you're catching this. I have an interview recorded with Russ Taff that will be coming out in January 2025 to coincide with the release of his new album. And it's a really very good interview that I'm just very happy with. So you want to make sure you stay tuned for that. So if someone were to ask me who the people are who have had the greatest impact on my faith, my guest today would be on that list of people. As a young, long-haired rock and roll teenager in a crew-cut church, it was really hard for me to find a place to fit in. But the music of Petra not only helped me to find that place, but played a tremendous role in my growth as a young Christian. My guest today is Petra's founder, guitarist, and principal songwriter, Bob Hartman. Bob, it is so great to have you. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Well, thank you, Brian.
Yeah, it's a real honor. And as I mentioned before we started recording, when I first sat down and had the idea of having this podcast to get the story of musicians and songwriters and artists, I created a list of people that I would love to have on it, and you are on that list. And so it's a real treat for me. I'm so grateful that we can make this work. So you've been on the road, the Best for Last 50th anniversary tour. How has that gone so far?
Oh, it's been tremendous. We have had great crowds, and more than just crowds, we've had the greatest amount of testimonies,
Wow.
coming back to us from people about our music. And that's what's really been the reward for us, is to hear from people. And, it's just been really nice.
Well, that's incredible. I would imagine that must be just encouraging to you, knowing how the Lord has used the ministry, your guys' ministry over the years. And we'll talk about that. I'll share a little bit of my own story towards the end and that of some friends, the impact of the band. I want to, and we'll talk more about the 50th anniversary tour and maybe what's coming up next here as we get a little closer to the end. But I want to just hit on some highlights of your life and kind of capture some parts of your journey that I think I personally have an interest in. Because as I, look at the age where you were, or the time where you were coming of age, you were, kind of in your teenage years, there were some great guitarists back then. And I'm curious which ones kind of captured you. I mean, this is the era of Clapton and Jimmy Page, Jeff Beck, Hendrix, and so many others. Were there any guitar players that kind of captured your ear early on as a budding guitar player?
Yes, well, let me first say, I'm old. And so I started playing guitar right before the Beatles came out. So that kind of gives you an idea. But after the Beatles, came all these great guitarists like Eric Clapton, Jimi Hendrix, Jeff Beck, Joe Walsh, all of these different guitarists and the thing that I usually say about it is each of those guitarists had a style and a sound, and you could tell it was them. And that was a great period for guitar. I think it made guitar progress greatly. And I was influenced by all of them. You couldn't help but be if you ever picked up a guitar. And so, yeah, it was a lot of fun to learn guitar during that time.
Yeah, I would imagine. I, came in after the British invasion, but still love that. That's the music I kind of grew up on and tried my hardest to play their songs, but it just couldn't. That's really interesting. And we'll kind of come back to your musical journey here in a minute. When did you give your life to Christ? How did you come to faith? When did that start for you?
Okay, well, I went to I grew up in Ohio, and went to Kent State University.
Right.
And people at the time said, if you can't go to college, go to Kent. And I said, that sounds right for me. And so I went to Kent, and in my sophomore year, they started shooting the students. And I thought it might be a good time to transfer after my junior first quarter. We were on quarters at Kent. But the shootings at Kent State, in all seriousness, in 1970, May 4th, 1970, I'll never forget that date, because it really was a dramatic change in America. To have students die on the campus for their demonstrations. And it had a profound effect on me. It made me question what's going on, what is real, what is true, what is, what is going on in the world, and where are we going? And at that age, there was a lot of anticipation and, very much worry about the future, and there is today as well. But
Right.
back then, we just wondered, and it was that summer. We got out of school early after the shootings, and I remember it was that summer that the Time magazine came out, the one that was featured in the movie, the Jesus movie.
Oh, yes. Jesus
Yeah.
Revolution?
Yes. They talked about, the background Time magazine. I saw that issue, and I said to myself, why are all these people getting into this if there's not something there?
Right.
And I began to look at it and see people with long hair being baptized in the ocean, and I thought, wow, why are all these people getting into this? Now, I had grown up in a church, but it was a church that didn't talk about a relationship with Christ. It was more of a social club. It was more of, yeah, it's the right thing to do to go to church. But there wasn't really any emphasis that I never heard of being born again. So I didn't have that strong kind of background, but I still kind of believed in God. And it was enough to make me think, gee, I got to try to figure out if there really is a God. And right at that time, the Lord sent back a person who I had grown up with, who'd moved to California and been on the very foundations of Calvary Chapel, of all places.
Yeah.
And he came back, and I asked him to tell me about his experience.
Really?
And he told me all about, the Lord, and he did not try to lead me to the Lord, but he said, I've planted the seed in you, and I hope it'll grow. And about 2 weeks later, I was alone on a couch in a living room, and I said, God, if you're there, I want you in my life. And that, because of the fact that I did that on my own, and there wasn't anyone standing over me saying, okay, say this,
Right.
now do that.
Yeah.
Because I might have been skeptical, more skeptical later, if I had followed someone's instructions that way. But because it was just an honest reaching out, and I knew it when I knew that God had heard me, and sure enough, things began to change greatly in my life. That was in 1970.
Wow. And so you were playing guitar already.
Yes.
What was so musically, when was the first time you picked up a guitar? Because I'm wondering how these two worlds combined for you, the world of music, then in this new budding faith in Christ.
Yes, well, I was 13 years old when I started playing guitar, and I didn't know anybody that played guitar. So I learned from books and things like that. And, I was playing easy. I kind of learned to pick out some of the surf music, three chord stuff. And then the Beatles came out and just blew everything up because they had their chord structures were so different and so much more complicated. So I had bought some Beatles books. And then I realized the Beatles books are not in the same key as the records. So then I learned to transpose and learned what they were actually playing. And it grew from there and so on and so forth. And watching, I always watched every guitar player I could see on TV or whatever. And, I started out with some local bands, and we were a pretty big deal, And when I went to Kent State, I was kind of a big deal in a small town. And I saw this poster for this band that was playing at the cafeteria. And I thought, well, here's a chance to go see a band from a bigger area, and see what they're like. And the name of the band was the James Gang.
Oh, wow.
So I saw Joe Walsh for the first time, and I thought, man, if this guy doesn't make it, I don't have a chance in the world to make it. Because he was really great in those days, and I think he would say, he has said in interviews, that was the best time of his playing.
Wow.
But anyway, so later on, they moved out, and another band came in, and I had quit going to the bar where they played all the time, and somebody came up to me and said, you got to see this band that's at JB's. That was the name of the club. He said, this guy's better than Joe Walsh. And I said, yeah, right. Yeah. So I went to the club, and there was this band called the Glass Harp.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And it was Phil Keaggy.
Yeah.
And so I got to see Phil Keaggy play many, many times in that bar. And that was just like unbelievable. So I had a couple of guitarists to watch that are world-class guitarists,
Yeah.
And I learned an awful lot from both of them. And, of course, what a joy it was to learn later that Phil had become a Christian. That was just, really some icing on the cake.
Yeah.
But when I got out of college, I transferred out of Bowling Green and out of Kent State and went to Bowling Green State University and graduated there in 1972. And I had a great offer for a job, but God called me to go to Bible school.
Wow.
So I went to Bible school, and that is where Petra started. And Petra is basically all I've done the rest of my life.
Yeah. Well, it's incredible. I didn't realize you saw Phil so early. Phil's a dear friend. He is such a wonderful brother. Always an incredible encouragement and somebody who just exemplifies Christ. He is such a neat guy. I have a deep appreciation for him too. I'm so curious because as a songwriter, and we'll talk more about your songwriting a little bit later, but do you remember the first Christian song that you wrote, and what was your, kind of, how did you begin down that road of being a writer?
Okay, before I was a Christian, I was in a band, and we did some original material, but I only was writing music, coming up with music. When I became a Christian, I realized, you know what, I have something to say now, and I can put that into a song. Yeah. So some of my first songs, Christian songs I wrote, are on Petra's first album, even though I wrote them for a Christian band, a short-lived Christian band I had before Petra. And Walking in the Light was one of them, Backbiting Blues was one of them, and there's a couple more, I think. that I had written. But anyway, those were the first ones that I wrote. And
Yeah.
when I listen to them now, of course, it's a little embarrassing at times, but that was a young Christian expressing his faith, you know.
Right. Well, exactly. And I think it's actually very remarkable, Bob, that because Petra was around for so long, you had to become very flexible in your writing. And what I mean is, I could take, four songs, four Petra songs. You'd mentioned Walking in a Light. I could take that, More Power to You, Adonai, maybe, and Beyond Belief, and play those for somebody who had never heard them, and they wouldn't think they're the same band. Not only because,
Yeah.
you can do a lot with production, and as you well know, production can become dated, but the way you were writing had to change significantly over time. Musical tastes had changed, styles had changed, and most writers, I don't think, have that ability. I think even some of the best writers around were good for a period of time for a particular sound, but you had to be extraordinarily flexible. How were you able to accomplish that change in writing approach, change in singers who maybe brought out different styles of writing, different producers who maybe drew different things out of you? How are you able to remain flexible through all those styles?
Well, I knew that Petra's ministry depended on us being able to connect with people musically, because that was our calling card. You know,
Right.
I mean, when we started at Bible school, we were and mostly an evangelistic band. We thought, we're a rock band. We're going to go out. The church is, not going to like our music, but we want to go out and reach those that won't listen to traditional church music.
Right.
And but after a while, we began to see, wow, Christians are really coming to hear us, and they're really being encouraged by music that they like and want to hear. And so we realized we had a dual ministry there, to edify believers and to win the lost to Christ. So the style of music had to be something that they could grab onto. And I've always been a rock player. I mean, the probably the thread that runs through Petra's music, even though we've done a number of ballads, and those ballads have been successful at a radio level.
Right.
The bulk of our music has been rock music. And, we're not a heavy metal band. We're not a country music band. I mean, we've seen lots of different trends come through Christian music, but we've always been just a rock band. And that is one of those things that just doesn't seem to get too old.
Okay.
So unlike us as people, it's been good.
Well, that's incredible. I look at some of those early albums, and they were very Allman Brothers-esque, so to speak. Early Eagles. You'd mentioned Joe Walsh. I can actually, and I love the Eagles, love the James Gang. I can hear some of that Joe Walsh guitar phrasing in a lot of your early work, which I think is really cool. And the other thing that I find interesting about some of those early Petra albums, they sound a lot like Head East, and we'll talk about John Schlittle a little bit later, but there are some parallels there that I think were probably very helpful for John, coming into the band, and we'll talk about that. But early on, you guys were part of the Jesus movement, and that, to me, as somebody who started listening to you guys in '85, Beat the System, I didn't know all the history at that time, but to know that you guys were actually part of the Jesus movement, that was really interesting. So as you were saying, was your mission, would you say, back in those days more evangelistic, or even evangelistic? And then did that did that change over time, or because to me it seemed like every Petra album there was a gospel song. I mean, they're all gospel in a way, but where the cross, there's always the cross on a Petra album. Was that something intentional to maintain that evangelism route to the band?
I would say no. In fact, that's the first I've heard anyone say that. I'll have to go back and look and fact check you.
Well, yeah. I mean, I just think of, Beat the System. You have It Is Finished, Back to the Street, you've got King's Ransom. There's always, to some degree, maybe that's not the
Well,
crux of the song, but the cross is
it,
always there.
the cross is central to our belief system, and you've got to to talk about Jesus, you kind of have to talk about the cross and the
Yeah.
sacrifice. But we wanted to be out front with what we said in our music. We didn't want to sneak in the back door and surprise, we're Christians.
Right.
We wanted to be out front, and we wanted people to respect us for our music. So we had to be good. We had to work at our music, and we felt like if we were good at our music, that people might listen to what we had to say. They might reject it, but at least they'd sit there for it.
Right.
Instead of run away. And so when we started out, talk about the Jesus movement. Well, we started in Fort Wayne, Indiana, and all through Indiana, Ohio, Michigan, all that we call the tri-state area, there were dozens of little coffee houses and para-church ministries in cities, and we played all those. We went through all of that, and so we did a lot of evangelistic work, and we'd have maybe one of those coffee houses would have us come play at the local high school or the local college on the campus, in the park, someplace where we drew a crowd and then gave our testimonies. So that was the kind of work we did in the very, very beginning. But then later we started to get some offers to play at some Christian colleges. And we thought, okay, So we would go to Christian colleges, and the Christian college kids were really enjoying what we were doing. And we thought, wow, this is not what we expected so much, but it's very welcome, And so we began to see that there was a whole bunch of people who would like our music just because it was culturally relevant.
Right.
And, yeah.
I look at the band's history, and there seems to be some points where the band took, I don't want a new direction would be overstating, but moments that had a significant impact on what the band was doing. And I would say one of them was when Greg joined the band. With his vocal range and his singing ability, did you have to change the way you were writing, or what was that transition like when Greg came into the band?
Well, I was growing as a writer, I think, and with Greg, yes, it was much easier because I could write just about anything range-wise, and he could sing it. And, I was one of the singers in the band before that, and we were looking for a singer for a long time in early Petra. It wasn't that we thought we were good enough singers. No, we thought we stunk and needed a singer. So, and of course I knew Greg from the band he was in, and Petra had actually played with E-Band, and so when E-Band broke up, Greg was just sitting around not doing anything musically, and when we called him to be a guest on our Come and Join Us, our second album, and that went really well, and we actually called him to be a guest on our third album as well, Wash is Whiter Than.
Yeah.
And then after that, we started doing concerts, and next thing you know, Greg's in the band.
That's incredible. Well, that's such a great, obviously great era for you guys. But was that around the time when you guys started to take on a lot of friendly fire, so to speak, or had that really started before? Because I, this is something that I've read in interviews. You talk about this, and something that I even back in the '80s when this discussion of Christian rock was so prominent. There were a lot of people that not only didn't like what you guys were doing, but were against what you guys were doing. Prominent pastors and teachers and authors. You guys took a lot of friendly fire. For you as the person who was doing, all the writing, or at least the vast majority of the writing, kind of the leader of the ministry, so to speak. What was that like for you personally? Because if it were me, I would have curled up in a ball of discouragement and said, I don't know if I can do this. But how were you able to persevere through that? And what was that period like for you?
There were a lot of times where we sat and said, are we really doing the right thing here? There's so many people that are saying we're off and wrong, and people said we were of the devil and Satan worshipers, and all of this incredible stuff. But we were really fortunate to be a part of a church that believed that you could use all kinds of different ways to reach people. Mm-hmm. They had a coffee house, in fact a great coffee house called the Adam's Apple, and we played there very often, and it was for that whole area. The Adam's Apple was kind of a central place where that gave so many other ministries in the area kind of a direction and an inspiration and a kick in the rear, to get it going and make it happen. And so it was a really great place to be a part of. And we would go out on the road and get beat up. We would go places and hear, hey, this church across town is praying against you guys today.
Wow.
And I remember how that made me feel. I was just flabbergasted. I thought, it's one thing to say we don't like that music and we're not going. It's another thing to say we don't even want them to reach people that we don't care about reaching, because that's what it amounted to. We felt like naively, we're going to go into your town and we're going to try to reach people that you're not reaching, and maybe they'll come to your church. Yeah. But no, they didn't want them in their church. Wow. Not those people, and that was really where the Jesus movement had a real dividing between the traditional church and the new, what God was doing. Yeah. And that was a very special time, because churches that said, in fact, the church that we went to, the pastor got up in front of this congregation and he said, look, there's some young people that are going to be coming in here, and you're not going to like the way they look. You're not going to like their hair. You're not going to like the way they dress. They might not even be wearing shoes, but we're going to love them in Christ because God is doing something in their life. Churches like that grew. The churches that said, no way are they coming in here until they look like us and talk like us and act like us. And that was the difference between churches that grew and churches that really died off during that period. And I think there's a real lesson there for every one of us today, that we don't ignore what God is doing because of our own personal preferences.
Yes.
Because that really is what it amounted to. Right. There was an idea of, I'm a Christian. If I don't like their music, it can't be of God, because,
right. Yeah.
Because I'm a Christian and I don't like it. So how could it be of God? I mean, how small do we make God when we say that?
Yeah.
So, Paul said, I will become all things to all people that I might be able to win some. We're trying to win some here, folks. We're trying to do something that's different because God always wants to do something new. And we need to listen to God to know what he wants us to do that's new, because he wants us to relate to people and not get in a rut. When we get in a rut, we just die off, we wither away. So Petra was always looking for, what do we do? What do we do? Right. Where do we go next? How do we communicate better? How do we do what we do better? And I think that might have been a key to, a lasting.
Well, and thank the Lord, Bob, because in that situation where you are taking so much fire from your brothers and sisters in Christ, it would have been very easy to become jaded and embittered. And I've seen that in many Christian musicians. So I am so grateful that you guys stayed the course and kept following the Lord. And, it is kind of sad. I remember several times, late 80s, early 90s, my hair was still very long. Being in a Christian bookstore, I was looking for a book and saw the lady walk around and ask every single person in the store how she could help them, and walked right by me. And I was like, oh, I guess people with long hair don't need help or don't read Christian books. So that's kind of sad. I think, things have changed, but to a much lesser degree, I can understand what you guys went through. It was right around this time. So when Greg joins the band, that's when Jonathan David Brown became the band's producer, and he was with you guys, of course, through Never Say Die, More Power to You, Not of This World, Beat the System, and then the live album Captured in Time and Space. What would you say David's impact on the band was? It seemed like your writing really had hit a great stride, some wonderful, wonderful songs. But what was David able to draw out of the band, maybe that previous producers hadn't?
Well, I think that I do think that I was making progress as a writer during that time, between Wash Is Whiter Than and Never Say Die. And I tell you that when I was writing for Never Say Die, some of the songs I didn't know I was writing for an album, didn't know if we'd even have a chance to do another album, but I was writing in a way that basically said, I'm not going to think about what's a nice thing to say, what's a Christian-y thing to say. I'm going to write what I feel is truth. And songs like Chameleon, it's a song that it's in your face. I mean,
it is.
No two ways about it. It's saying, it's
come out from among them.
Yeah. And that's the kind of thing I said, I don't know if anybody will like this or not, but I don't care. But it's honest. It's real. It's what I feel. And when I made that choice and started to do that, I think it opened up some new doors for me, songwriting-wise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. If I listen to a lot of music, and if I were to look at a band's catalog, I can't think of 3 consecutive albums that are more different from each other than if I were to have Not of This World, Beat the System, and Back to the Street. They are so vastly different from one another. Obviously, Not of This World comes out 83, Beat the System in 85. When I interviewed John Schlitt, he mentioned that when he first met you, he said, "Oh, I love Beat the System," and he said you said something like, "Well, we won't be doing that again." Those 3 albums are so different. As a writer, what was that like for you? And to look at those 3 albums back to back to back, that's they're all so different. What was that period like for you? Obviously, a lot of change going on, but as a writer, and what was that like for you?
Well, I look at Not of This World as sort of the bookend to More Power to You. I mean, it was an extension of that.
I agree.
That style. And then Beat the System, what was happening when we did Beat the System was a lot of electronic music was coming in, and people were using drum machines and weird sounds and all this stuff. And So we did that album using the Fairlight. Now, I don't know if you know what a Fairlight is.
Yeah, I
A
do.
lot of your audience won't know, but it was one of the first digital recorders, and you could do drums and bass and all kinds of different keyboard sounds on it. But it was very primitive by today's standards, very
Right.
primitive. And but it cost an enormous amount of money.
Wow.
And so we did that. We did the Beat the System album using a programmer with a Fairlight. And so a lot of that music came out that way, the way it did, due to that. I think I don't have any bad feelings about the way I wrote songs for
Mhm.
that because I'm very happy with those songs that were on that album on Beat the System. But
Absolutely.
when it came time to do Back to the Street, we had new producers,
Mhm.
John and Dino Alafante,
Yeah.
a new singer, and it was time to, get back to the basics
Mhm.
of rock and roll.
Yeah.
And, John has that kind of voice
Sure
that
does.
can pull off, rock. And
Mhm.
so that was where we needed to be.
Yeah. To stay with Beat the System for a minute, I do think one of the greatest worship songs that I know of is on that album, and that's Adonai. And I think, Bob, that song is a very anointed song, and it really, to me, sounds as if it came from the quill of David. It's very psalm oriented. The words are, I think, are just incredibly inspired. I've got him up here on my notes. This thirsting within my soul won't cease till I've been made whole. To know you, to walk with you, to please you in all I do. You uphold the righteous, and your faithfulness shall endure. That's a psalm, genuinely a psalm. And I love the second verse. Unchanging, consuming fire, lift me up from mud and mire. Set my feet upon your rock. And I love this line. It's hard for me to listen to this line without tearing up. And let me dwell in your righteousness. That is David. What inspired that song? That is true, pure worship right there.
Gosh, I would say uh, the Psalms definitely inspired that. That's been written so long ago, I can't remember any specific thing that I used, but obviously the Psalms,
Yeah.
as you say, are very much in that vein, and so yeah, it just expresses that worship to God, and
Yeah.
in a way that is still rock,
Yeah.
But, yeah.
And I love the way you guys played it on Back to the Rock. It's a little more guitar heavy, but you're right. The writing is there. You take the production out of it. It's a little more keyboard heavy on the album. But at its core, it's a great rock song. In fact, that song, I used to after high school, my friends we were all kind of in bands back then, and that's a song I brought that we would play. None of the other guys were Christians. We're like, hey, you guys got to hear the song. So I have a recording somewhere of us just rocking out to Adonai. We didn't have a singer, but we were just playing because I loved that song so much. It's just a beautiful one, and it's continued to stay in your set list throughout the years too. It's a fan favorite. One of the things I had read, and then we'll move talk a little bit about the Schlitt era, is that the band over the years has had periods of struggle. Greg leaves. I had read that there was financial challenges around this period of time. When Greg left, was there a time when maybe Petra's ministry was going to come to the end? What was that like? Was there any thought of, I don't know if we can continue, or what was that period of time like for you guys?
Yeah, there definitely was that period. Um, There definitely was an unknown period there. God, are we supposed to go on? And we ask ourselves that question many times over the 50 years of Petra's ministry, because we want to know, are we just going through a tough time that we need to endure, or are we coming to a place where God is saying, okay, I need you to do something else now?
Yeah.
And that's a question that every Christian has to ask themselves with whatever they're doing. And so we were asking those questions, and I remember one time. I mean, I'm always the one who's not the most spiritually minded at times. I remember once I said to my wife, because we were in debt, I said, if somebody would come along right now, and say, I'll pay all your debts if you'll leave Christian music, I said, I think I'll do it. I would do it.
Yeah.
Because that can be a real burden.
Absolutely.
And but luckily, luckily there wasn't anybody with that much money, and so I had to gut it out, and thank God that I did, because boy, the Lord has done so many things since then that are just confirmation of His blessing and leading and guidance and everything.
Was it that struggle, that financial struggle? And I think what you've said here, Bob, is profound. Sometimes a struggle can be God's confirmation that you need to continue. It's not going to be easy, but continue. God's people have always struggled. You look at anyone who's done anything great for the kingdom, there has been struggle. We see it in Scripture. Was it maybe that financial struggle where you don't have the wealth of the world, so to speak, that maybe caused you to write, either consciously or subconsciously, to write Fool's Gold? Because that song, of course, I will say is my favorite Petra song. It's about not having this world's gold, but knowing that your gold is waiting in a crown. Was that part of the impetus of that song, you think?
Yeah, I think so, probably. But you're surprising me. That's your favorite Petra song?
It
Fool's Gold?
is. It
Wow.
is. And I'm a rock guy, so I mean, I have so many favorites. Adonai is definitely one, but I think there's something about that song, Bob, that coming from being raised in an alcoholic home and then having a stepdad I didn't get along with, that there's something about that song that I found, it's making me tear up here thinking about it. There's something about that song that I've always found greatly comforting, and that the bridge, my goodness, to this day, to me is such great worship. When the crowns of gold I'll lay before His feet, the worthy Lamb of God is the treasure we will keep. Some may call me foolish, some may call me odd, but I'd rather be a fool in the eyes of men than a fool in the eyes of God. That is profound. You know how encouraging that is to a teenager who is looking for direction? Huge. That's interesting that perhaps that struggle that you guys were going through may have been what fueled that song. It's a beautiful song.
Thank you. I'm trying to remember all that was going through my head at the time when I wrote these different songs you're bringing up. And, Fool's Gold, obviously, the Bible says that the foolish, that people are going to think that Christians are foolish,
Right.
for believing in God. But, that I know that was a key part of coming up with that song, Fool's Gold, because what the treasure that we have by following Christ is far greater than anything the world has to offer.
Right. Amen. What a great message. What a great message. We need that today, and it's unfortunate a lot of Christian music today is just kind of thin on truth. I don't want to overgeneralize, but because there's some great things out there, but that is such a profound truth to share in song. So In comes John Schlitt, and I loved when I chatted with John. He talked about how you were this dogged detective in hunting him down. He had gotten fired from Head East, as he talks about it, and his descent into drugs and alcohol was, he's been very open about it, and got to the point where he wanted to kind of end everything. And the way Christ intervened in his life is just incredible. I want to hear your side. So how were you able to track this guy down, and why John? Like, what made you think? There are, lots of singers out there. What was it that made you want John Schlitt? We're going to pause our chat right there. There is so much ahead in my conversation with Petra's founder, guitarist, and songwriter, Bob Hartman. And I have got to say that Bob shares some huge Petra news near the end of part 2, and I mean huge. You will definitely want to tune in and tell your friends who are Petra fans to tune in as well. For more Petra-related content, check out my in-depth interview with John Schlitt, an interview that John called one of the best he's ever done. My interview with John Elefante is available as well, and we spent a good amount of time talking about the work he and his brother Dino did in production for Petra albums. For other CCM-related interviews, check out my interview with Mark Gershmel from Whiteheart, my extensive interview with Phil Kagi, Mike Stan from the Altar Boys, The Salt of the Sound, and so many others. If you'd like to support the work of Journey to the Stage with Brian Fraser, please consider supporting us on Patreon. You can do that at patreon.com/journey to the stage. That's patreon.com/journey to the stage. Make sure you subscribe or follow wherever you're catching this, and any kind reviews or ratings that you give really are helpful in helping other people to find Journey to the Stage, and you can help keep this indie podcaster encouraged. I look forward to sharing part 2 with Bob Hartman, and until then, keep your bags packed and join me again on our next Journey to the Stage. And that's a wrap.